Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome to a brand new Unity tutorial series. This series is going to be all about making an action RPG top-down 2D game. Hopefully we're going to have a little bit of fun making this and we're going to learn the basic elements you need to get your own kind of RPG game going and make something fun and entertaining for yourself. So in this first episode we're just going to take a look at the basic setup of what we're going to be using in our project. So I have a brand new, Unity just started up here. We're going to create a new project. We're going to make it a 2D project because, like I said, it's going to be a top-down 2D RPG. We need to pick our location, so you pick that by going in there like that and selecting your folder. And we need to name our project. So we're going to call this Action RPG Tutorial, just to make it nice and easy to remember. So that's the first thing we have to do, and then all we have to do after that is just hit create project, because we're not going to import any packages or anything like that from the game, so it'll be just fine the way it is. And once Unity loads up, we should be met with a scene just like this. You might have, if you've been using different Unity projects, you might have different scenes set up, but you might have a different layout for your scenes. But if you go to Window up here and Layouts and go to Default, as you can see, that'll set everything up just like this. We could go for another one if we wanted to, 2x3 or anything like that. But for now, we'll just stick with default, just for the sake of keeping things nice and simple. So what we're going to need a few different folders so that everything will be nicely set up, so that as we go on through the future, everything will be nice and easy to remember. So if we go we're in our project folder here. This is where you'll handle all your files and stuff like that. And then in this big assets block, we're going to right click here and go up to the create a folder. So we're going to create a new folder and we're just going to call this will be our scripts folder. So that's where we're going to put, not scripts. So that'll be where we put all our files, our C# files, as we create and write them. And there'll be lots of files that we're going to create over the series, but lots of straightforward things. And we're going to keep things as simple as possible. So if you don't have any experience with programming before, we'll keep everything nice and simple and straightforward so that it's nice and easy to understand, and we'll go from the basics upwards from there. So we'll also need to create another folder for our art files that we're going to use. We're going to create a folder for audio that we'll want to use at some point in the future. And for now, those are three basic categories that we can just stick with and just be fairly happy with. So, if you look in the description below this video, there should be two links to two separate art files that we're going to use. And if I just open my folder here, so these are the two things that will be linked below. There's a little character guide that I have here that I made just for us to be able to use someone in our world. And there's also a collection of tiles. If we go into the other one, once you download it, it's a roguelike pack, and go into Sprite Sheet. There's a collection of all this stuff that you can use for your ground and for different various objects. See, there's beds, there's candles, there's trees, everything you could all the basics you would need for starting an RPG world. And that whole pack is made by Kenny, who makes awesome free stuff like this that's free to download and free to use in your own game, no matter what you want to do with it. So what we're going to do is, we have this folder here, and we're in our Sprite Sheets folder, as I said, inside that pack. If we just go back to Unity, if we double click on the art folder, we'll go into there. And what we'll do is go back to our Sprite Sheet and just click and drag that in. And that'll automatically load it into the game for us. And we'll go back up to here and we'll click and drag in the character as well. So now we have a character and we have all these sprites. But if we were to put them into our game, they'll just end up as a grid of 4 little dudes looking, he's all blurry and everything. That's not what we want at all. So we need to set up the settings for both of these files so that they make sense. So if we just double click on this guy and zoom back in, if you count how many pixels across he is, he's basically 16 pixels across and 16 pixels up. So we know that each square on this block is 16 by 16. So if we go back in here, what we want to do is set our pixels per unit to 16. So then we'll know that, say if we move a guy one space over, so then we know exactly one space is moving him over 16 pixels kind of as he is here. So then we'll know he's moved exactly one space over in our game world. It's a handy way just to keep things consistent, because the exact same thing is true with our roguelike. Oh, sorry, I just clicked on this, so I'm just going to hit apply here, and that applies the 16 to our guy. And if we open this up as well, and we zoom in, we can see on this thing as well, it's also, that block's kind of hard to see. Let's go for one of these. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So these blocks are 16 by 16 as well. So it's important to keep these things consistent, because you don't want to be mixing different size pixels amounts. So again, on this one, we want to go 16 pixels per unit on that as well. So then we know everything lines up nicely and it's all very straightforward. We also want to, on this filter mode here, this is what makes it kind of look a little bit blurry when you have it on bilinear. So for pixel art, that like what we're using, of course this is Unity, you can use whatever kind of different art you want to use, but what we're using here in this project, we want to set it to point. I'm going to apply that, and actually since we just looked at the character guy a second ago and we saw he was all blurry, if I apply this and drag it in here now, first of all you see he's a lot bigger, and if you look at the grid that is already laid out in Unity, now you can see that if we can just line up roughly, one of these blocks is equal to the same size of one of these guys. So that's how we know that one full block here is equal to one full block of character. But as you can see, if we zoom in on this guy a whole load, the edges now are exactly solid. So there's no more that kind of blur effect that we had. So that's exactly what we want for our pixel character. And then finally, what we want to do here is set up these defaults. So this block is only 64 by 64. So we know the max size 2048. That's way too big. So we can just go here and select 64. So that means it won't try and load up and take up too much memory than we need it to. And then in format, we want to set it to true color, because if you set it to, say, compressed, it'll try and compress the image, but when it's a pixel art, you're going to end up with weird little blocks of color all over the place that you don't want. So we're going to hit apply there, and that'll be just fine. I'll do the exact same thing on the sprite sheet. So we go here, hit 64, hit true color, and yeah, we set that to point already, and apply that. But like I said, we drag him in and we've got a little grid of dudes. That's not what we want. We only want to be able to see one player on the screen at a time, or else it'll get very, very confusing for our players. So what we do is go to Sprite Editor here. Oh wait, no, sorry. First of all, we have to go where it says Sprite Mode up here. At the moment it's set to single, so it treats all of these, this whole thing as one big object. But if we set it to multiple and hit apply, and then go into Sprite Editor, what we can do now is basically create a whole load of different sections. If we can either click and drag and see, we can create all these different blocks. And just as an example, if we apply this, all those little blocks we just created, if we hit this little side arrow, suddenly we have all these little strange things. They look random and weird. They're not what we want. But what we know is, if we go back to the Sprite Editor and just delete all these little bits, what we know is that this guy is 16 by 16. So if we go to slice up here, and instead of saying automatic, we'll say grid by cell size. So here we have an option for pixel size, and its default is 64 by 64, but what we're going to set it to is 16 by 16. Tell it to slice, and now you can see it's created a whole lot of boxes exactly around the edges of our character. So we hit apply like this, go into here, and you can see we've got all these guys broken out into separate little images now. So if we just drag him in there, bam, now we've got our player in our game. Of course he doesn't do anything at the moment, we haven't got anything going for him, but that's okay. And we can do the exact same thing on our roguelike sprite sheet, but it's ever so slightly different. So we want to set it to multiple as well. Hit apply and go into our Sprite Editor. No, I shouldn't have set this to be 64, because as you can see, this is what happened now that I set that to be 64. It's trying to compress it all down into 64. what we should have done, if we put this back on 2048, if we look at the dimension on the side of the image, it's 968 by 526. And what you want to do is go for whatever is the longest side. So 968 is the longest side, so we want to get the next number above that, which will be 1024. Hit apply. And now when we go into our Sprite Editor again, everything's back the way it should be, just the way we want it to. So this is going to be slightly different than what we did with our player, because each tile is still 16 by 16. Oops, didn't mean to create that. And just for reference, I should have said this when we first got in here, but if you can scroll in and zoom out with your mouse wheel, and if you right click, it'll drag this thing around, which is very handy to use. So like I said, these are all 16 by 16, but as you can see, there's a little space between each one. So obviously we want to allow for that. We don't want it to just take this to make blocks with a little bit of space around the edge or anything like that. So what we do is go to slice, and we have grid by cell size. So we have our pixel size is 16 by 16, and now what we want to do is say, okay, there's one little space around each one, so that means there's a padding of 1. So on our padding here, we'll say X is 1 and Y is 1. And now again, we're going to hit slice, and it'll chop it all up into little bit of pieces. So hit slice. But as you can see, there's so many little things here that it can take a little while to chop up a big image like this. So we're going to hit OK, and I'm going to pop back in a second when this is all finished processing. You guys can obviously wait for this to process yourself, and then jump back to the video. So see you in a second. Okay, so once that's finished processing, you'll see the little box up here in the corner disappear, and all the little tiles will have a nice little box drawn around them. You can see they've all lined up because of that extra padding. They've all lined up nicely around everything. So now we've got a whole load of blocks that we can use to create our world. If we hit apply here, it'll apply those changes. Okay, and once that's applied, then we can just close that down, and if we hit the little side arrow here again, now we can see we've got a whole load of things. I'm just gonna zoom this out by dragging this little slider up and down. If you can make them really big, or you can just zoom it out and make them nice and small. So as you can see, we've got a whole load of items to use as background for our player. So if we just go to the 6th object here, which is kind of a generic grass tile, just to show you how this is all broken down actually, if we go back to here, if you look at what items we've got here, we've got 2 blues, and then the top of some blue and grass. Blue, I should say, is water, obviously. 2 bits of water, and then top of bits of where grass and water meet, and then some more grass here. If we go back to our Sprite Editor, which apparently is going to take a second to open. But once we go back in here, you should see that the whole top line of this sprite sheet is pulled out and created first. So I have to wait for this to open up. So you can see the whole top line is created, like I said, and then the next line will start with some more blue stuff. So rather than going down and cutting it that way, it basically orders everything one by one as it goes along. So if we scroll down here, we can see the next line here is these kind of blue ones. So what I'm going to do is just grab this green grass template here, drag it in and pop it down there. And we're going to create a few of these to use as the ground. But as you can see, if we drag our player on top of it, we can use these different items here to control the world within Unity. So by default with 2D, it kind of sticks to this one. But if we were to use this one here, for example, this controls the size of things. So we can like squash things up or down like that, and then hit Control and Z to undo. You can squash it that way. Or if we grab the middle, we can just make it all bigger or smaller like that. We won't really want to mess too much around with that because pixel art, you want to keep it all the same size. Here we have rotation, like this. We can grab the size and rotate it, or we can flip it forward or flip it around like that. Because at the end of the day, Unity is a 3D program, so we can rotate this stuff around in 3D. But we don't want that either, so we put that back to normal. And then finally we have this kind of cross object, and this is moving things around in the world like this, moving stuff around. So this is what I was going to say. If we move this over the player, suddenly we see the grass is on top of the player, and that's obviously not what we want to happen. We want the player to be behind that, or sorry, the player to be on top of the grass. And finally, out of these objects here, we've got a hand tool, and basically the hand tool just lets you move around the world whatever way you want to. But you can do the same if you have any of the other ones selected. If you right click, you can drag the world around you. So we want to make sure the grass is behind the player. So I'm just going to move this here so it's just like that. And basically the way we can do this is by assigning a layer to our player and to our background object. So here we have a sorting layer, and there's only a default option. So both our bit of ground and our player are on the sorting layer for default. So what we're going to do is click on that, and we're going to add sorting layer. And when you click on that, you're brought to the tags and layers kind of section. And basically all we're going to do is hit this little plus here, and on this one we're going to say ground, and then add another one, and we're going to say player. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to these two different objects. So we have our ground here, and we can see it's been selected here. We're going to set the sorting layer on that to be ground, and then on our character guy, which has a really long object name because of where we pulled him from in there, and we don't want him called that. So what we're going to do is click on this again, and we're just going to rename this to player. We don't have to worry too much about the ground because there's going to be a whole lot of them, and we're not going to worry about what they're called. But our player, then we're going to go to our sorting layer and hit player. So now what will happen is our player appears above the ground. And if we go back to adding sorting layers here, what we can see is whatever layer order they're placed in makes them appear in different orders in the world. So if we were to grab the player layer here, click on the two little lines to grab it and pull it up, suddenly the player will be behind the ground. So it basically goes from the bottom here, which is our default, then the ground, and then the player. So if we add in more layers in the future, like houses and stuff like that, we'll know that we know which order to put them in the world. And so we have our little bit of ground here, but obviously that's not a lot for our player to move around on or anything. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And what we're going to do is, in our hierarchy here, which is basically what tells us everything is active in our game at the moment, we're going to right click on that and create an empty. And I click on that again, and we're just going to call that ground. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to keep things nice and tidy. And we're just going to set the position of this thing to be 0, 0. So it's at the center of our world. And what we're going to do is grab the ground bit that we had here and just click on that and drag it into our ground here. So what this will do is it'll pop it inside this ground object, and then we're about to make a whole load of these, and what you'll be able to do then is just click on this and it'll disappear out of the hierarchy, so it doesn't take a whole load of space up when we started adding in enemies and moving other things around. So on our ground, if we drop this back down, make sure we're clicked on this one, we're going to put this to 0, 0 as well. And we'll zoom back in, and what we're going to do is hit Control and D, which will make a copy of it. And then if you hold Control and click, we're on the movement one still here, so if you hold Control and click and drag on that like that, it'll move it exactly one square in the world. So if you did it again, we'll move it to here. So we're going to Control and D again, and again, and then we're going to go back to our first guy here. Control and D, Control and D. So now we've got a little section of grass. We'll make another one. I'm going to make another one actually on the other side here. And what we're going to do is select all of these and Control and D again, and just as it creates a whole lot of them, we're going to just drag up like that. Control and D to, whoop, oh, I clicked off. I'm going to undo that because that's kind of annoying. Yeah, we've got our whole creation there now. So we'll do that like that, and then we're going to drag whole load to the bottom, whole load to the bottom again, and one more. So now we've got a little bit of area for our player to move around on. And you can see there's some weird gaps forming, but that's okay, because if we switch over to game view here, we're going to mess around with the camera and we'll make sure that these things aren't kind of creating these extra spaces. We can right click and maximize. You can see we're ending up with some different lines, but we're going to deal with that as we go forward in the game. For now, it's not a big concern. But as you can see, we've got a basic little setup here. Now we've got a player in our world and we've got a whole lot of grass for him to walk around on. But he can't do any walking yet. So in the next episode, we're going to take a look at writing some basic scripts to get our character moving around in the world. So thanks for watching this very first episode of this RPG series. And I will be back soon with some more learning goodness. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.